Next, we're going to move on to my other guest, Mr. Suhas Chakma. He's one of the leaders of the Global Association for the Indigenous Peoples of the Chittagong Hill Tracts. He's a New Delhi-based human rights advocate for the Juma people. Also as an RRAG director, he condemns the land dispossession and the violence in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. He talked up in 2024 about there was a massive arson attack there, and he's criticised the failed 1997 Chittagong Hill Tract Peace Accord, urging the United Nations to intervene and address the ongoing abuses. So, Dr. Suhas Chakma, Dr. Suhas Chakma, the floor is yours.
How many minutes, Chris?
You've got 10, 15 minutes. Up to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me for this session. I think it's very important for people in Europe and the Bangladeshis in Europe especially to know actually what is happening in Bangladesh as well as in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. I think I'll make some preliminary remarks about the overall situation in Bangladesh, then go into CHT, the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And I think we are in Bangladesh, as you had said, at a crossroad. I think one of the reasons for being at the crossroad is the belief of the international community that this government is actually committed to reforms. And the European Union, the United Nations, and lots of other countries in the world just supporting reforms without understanding whether this government has the mandate, willingness to carry out reforms. And reforms have become the excuse to remain in power as long as possible. So you could see on the drop of a hat, Dr. Yunus is actually establishing Reforms Commission. After all the commissions have submitted their reforms, and he established the Oikomoto Commission, which is National Commission for Unity. Then he set up a commission to inquire into the electoral malpractices in the last 3 elections, which are in any case covered in all these reform committees which have already been established. So one could see that one after the another commission is are being established. I even have lost the count of the number of commissions which they have set up. And international community still believes that actually this government is committed to reforms without a parliament. So they are just bringing ordinances whose lifeline is only about 6 months. And the worst thing is that this government has no legal standing at this point of time to remain in power. Because in December, the High Court of Bangladesh had restored the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of Bangladesh, in a way restoring the interim government. And the interim government could actually remain in power only for 3 months. So their term has already ended if you follow the rule of law. So at this point of time, what we have in Bangladesh is actually anarchy, because the government doesn't accept the constitution. They pick up provisions of the constitution which they like, and provisions of the laws which they like. But when you do not have the constitution itself functioning, then where do you go? But I think international community still believes, because Sheikh Hasina was so bad that all these things could be allowed. And I just wonder because I follow Bangladesh very regularly, if Yunus was in power for 15 years, what would that happen? Because just in less than a year's time, what we see today, he has in a way, in terms of human rights violation, could possibly match what, Hasina had done. So that's the perspective which we come as far as Bangladesh is concerned. So if that's the general situation for Bangladeshis, what could happen to the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which is always, not on the map. It's a small region. Geographically, it covers about 10% of the territories, but less than 1% of the populations who are the indigenous peoples of that region. And if you ask us today, because many of the people who are there belong to my community, I think they have reached, in a way, dead-end situation. They had seen General Ershad and the military administration prior to that. They had seen the BNP, Awami League, BNP at different point of time, different interim governments. For the first time, I think we had faith on some people who were selling the idea of revolution, the idea of inclusivity, because after all, this movement was started on the premise of anti-discrimination movement. And what we see today are, I think, worse form of discrimination, which we had never seen in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. So if you look at the entire reform process, there is no space for any indigenous person and any Hindu minority, because no one has been included in the reforms commission, especially the Constitutional Reform Commission. And if you look at the reforms which have been undertaken, the recommendations which have been made, there is no reference to whatsoever on indigenous peoples, Upajati, scheduled tribe, whatever terminologies you use in the entire what's constitutional reform process, which was chaired by Ali Riaz. There is no reference whatsoever to these people, as if they do not exist. So they could not even find the term, who are these people. So in a way, you do not exist in the terminology. And I think recently they amended the law, which they are saying, in which they provide that indigenous peoples will not be identified as small minorities, Khudro Nigosti, and they thought they will, take on something which has been discarded by Trump. So they included diversity, and they still do not know in which direction they are going. So in a way, the people of the Chittagong Hill Tracts have no space whatsoever in the constitutional reform process. You do not exist. And because you do not exist in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, in the peace process, in the constitutional reform process, you do not exist anywhere. And in fact, the first statement which was made by Yunus when he went to visit the UN General Assembly last year, on 2nd of October, in an interview to Voice of America, he said, Chittagong Hill Tracts Accord is not something which can be dealt with the current government, and it should be dealt with the elected government. No one knows when the elected government will come. So at that point of time, I think he basically told the people of Chittagong Hill Tracts that you actually do not belong to Bangladesh. So the question arises, if you are having a reform process, if you are not included or given any space, then where would these people go? And that's what I think we have seen, that the tremendous amount of human rights violations which we have seen. And I think we have mentioned about the violence which took place in September last year, from the 19th of September, 20th September, then 1st of October. I think these incidents are not new. But there was one particular new element, which was the fact that 3 advisors of the government of Bangladesh, they went and visited the Chittagong Hill Tracts. Then they set up a commission of inquiry by the additional division commissioner of Chittagong, Mr. Nuri, and they said in 14 days' time we'll provide the report. And as of now, I think it's about 9 months, people have not seen the report. So what do we see? We basically see that there is absolute impunity. And I think what we have seen in the current government is that whenever some human rights violation takes place, and Dr. Yunus speaks as if he's in some university and saying and telling people you should not do this, you should not do that, and these are misinformation, etc., etc. But for God's sake, you are the prime minister of the country. You run the government. You have the police, you have the judiciary, and you have to act like the government. And he doesn't act. So whether it's the violations of the rights of the minorities or in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, what he does is basically give some lame excuses, then it dies off, and he has set up this disinformation unit, which I say disinformation, this press wing fact check, which is funded by the British through a company, in the UK. This SNC uses disinformation, this press wing fact check. It itself manufactures. In fact, we had some dispute with an organization called Dismissed Lab with respect to certain figures in CHT. There was some internal communication. And you can imagine that the chief advisor's press secretary or press wing goes and alleges on record that we are intimidating certain, fact-checking unit. These are our internal communication. There might be divergence of views, but you should not be privy to it unless they are your organizations. So what this government has done is to set up huge number of disinformation centers, again funded by the foreign donors who believe that this is a part of reform. So we have complete impunity. And the last point which I want to mention about the Chittagong Tract is that the Chittagong Tract Accord was signed in 1997. From 1997 till today, so many presidents had to flee, the chief of army staffs had to flee, the generals had to flee, the Chief Justice Sarath Sinha had to flee, prime ministers had to flee, opposition leaders had to flee, but they have not done anything with respect to Chittagong Tracts. Shantula Ma still continues as the chairman of the CHT Regional Council without election for the last 27 years. Without election. So democracy, which is the basis for which they dismissed Hasina's government, it has not reached Chittagong Tracts. The last election in the Chittagong Tracts, both the Hill District Councils and Regional Council had never election. The Hill District Council was organized by General Ersad in 1989. So from 1989 till today, we have not seen election. Why? We have not seen election simply because the government of Bangladesh, under the instruction of the military, they don't want the conflict to end. Because if the conflict ends, then they will not have the raison d'etre to remain in CHT. They cannot play such a powerful role in Bangladesh. And if you look at it, because the elections are held, and the elections everywhere around the world are used to build relationship between the communities, and you have to depend on each other. Tribal has to get an indigenous person has to get the votes of the Muslims. Muslim population have to get the votes of the indigenous population. So you create some kind of a symbiotic relationship. But the Bangladesh army doesn't want it. That's why no election had taken place. So everybody has been dismissed, even in the district council, but not in the Chittagong Tracts. Then what do we have? We have state-sponsored terrorism, because which most people in Bangladesh and most people in the European Union do not know, that Shantula Armas Parbot Chittagram Janashankati Samiti, which signed the peace accord, they also maintain an armed group. Now the question is, if you are in power, exercising the legal authority given under the Regional Council Act, under what laws of the Bangladesh or anywhere else, you could have your own private army. And if you read the Indian newspapers, you could see that they are recruiting child soldiers. They are engaged in drug trafficking. They are engaged in arms smuggling. And these are not my saying. You search in the internet, you could find it. Then final question arises: why would Yunus allow this? Yunus allows this because he wants the indigenous peoples to remain in conflict, and that is where the Rohingya issue is so critical. And if you look at the report of the International Crisis Group, Dangers of a Rohingya Insurgency, which has just been released on 18th of June, it was perfect, correct, everything. But it failed to mention one particular fact, that the Rohingya insurgents are not only in Cox's Bazar. They are mainly in the Chittagong Tracts. They are in Bandarban districts. There is a free zone which is being created. Then we have an insurgency which is coming up, and the last risk which we have is that at some point in time the donor agencies will run away because they can't fund the Rohingyas, because Myanmar's government will not take. Then the entire population outbursts into CHT. Then we again suffer. I think the last point which I wanted to mention is that in the entire process, I think we have to bear in mind that when Yunus came to power, everybody thought he was a Nobel laureate. I think during my first briefing for the diplomats in Delhi, I said, we do not know the worldview of Yunus. I disagree with what Hasina had done. Had raised questions about the violations. But I think one particular point I always agreed with former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, when she said that Yunus is nothing but a shoot core. In India, I have seen how the microcredit agencies work, how the EMI agents work, and if we understand a common EMI agent, if we understand how the microcredit agencies work, just because somebody has got the Nobel Prize, he is not necessarily a Nobel person. And the fact that he has failed to address basic human rights issues or establish accountability shows that, I think we are on the wrong path, and the CHT people will suffer, not necessarily because of this government policy, but because of the Rohingya issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Suhas. That was a very good testimony. Suhas, any recommendations or what you would like to see going forward?
Well, I think the Chittagong Treks people deserve election for the local bodies which were established. There was no election in the CHT Regional Council from 1998. It's time that this government or this interim government at least allows the election in the CHT Regional Council. There were no elections in the Three Hill District Council of Rangamati, Bandarban, and Khagrachari district from 1989. So I think, democracy should not, in Bangladesh, should not mean democracy minus Chittagong Treks. I think it should include the elections in this Chittagong Treks. And in fact, the prior elections in the CHT should be held prior to the national elections.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. Actually, with a little test or a taste for democracy. I think we would have seen more from Yunus on that front as well.